Ellie Pankin Show, WGY, May 14, 1979.
We hope is going to have all the answers on New York State's education, because he's the New York State Commissioner of Education, Dr. Gordon Ambach. We'll be meeting Dr. Ambach in a few moments, or Commissioner Ambach. I'll ask him during the commercials what he likes to be called. And we'll be talking with him about all areas of education, or let's say as many as we possibly can discuss in the hour and a half ahead of us. And we hope that you will be calling in to talk too. It's a wonderful opportunity, not one that happens very often, to come face-to-face or voice-to-voice with one of the major officials of the state. And certainly education is an issue that concerns all of us. The greatest percentage of our state tax monies does go to the education budget. So we all have a vested interest, as well as that very essential one, for our kids. And lots of us for ourselves. Almost everybody's in school today. So that's what we have on the docket today. We'll return in one moment here on Dialogue 81 on 81 WGY right after this. Dialogue 81 here on 81 WGY. The New York State Commissioner of Education, Gordon Ambach. Commissioner, it's very nice to have you here. It is.
Delighted to be with you this afternoon.
I'm most pleased, and I think it affords our listeners a good opportunity to talk a lot about education. There are so many things. I know that I had made a list that has 17 items on it. I think it might be, interesting at first to ask you what you consider to be the main issues of education. What do you and your department give major attention to? And are they new issues, or do we have ongoing issues in education?
Major issue for us in education in New York, Ellie, is the quality of our educational program. At the elementary and secondary education level, we have had a great emphasis on improving performance, on improving quality. Our competency testing program, our concern for the regents examination program. This is evidence of our concern for assuring that there is strong performance by our secondary school students. We want to make certain that each student who completes a secondary program in New York State is well qualified to be able to handle either additional education or to take a good job.
Is that a dream?
No, I don't think it's a dream. I think it's a necessity. The level of complexity with which each of our students is going to have to deal in the future, our technological society is such that we simply have to have each person with the kinds of skills, the foundation skills, to deal with those kinds of complexities and technological developments.
Aren't we then saying, though, that every single human being from when they're 4 or 5 has the ability? And there has to be a great variety in abilities, so that our expectations for educational levels have to have a lot of either variety or something in them. Everyone can't get to the same place.
No question about it. There is a tremendous range of abilities. But one has to look at the expectations that you have in our society or our state as a whole. And expectations have changed over the years. What it was expected in 1850 or in 1870, for example, as to the level of education of the society was quite different from what we expect of our society today. There's never been a fixed measure of performance. There's never been a fixed standard for a single society. It changes. And what's very important in recognizing that there will be individual differences in what's learned is that we set a standard and we have expectations as a whole as to what levels of performance we need to meet.
Aside from quality as a major educational issue, and I realize that that's so vast and broad, but it is essential because much proceeds from that. What else would be of major concern to you that we need to really deal with, no matter how much money is available or not?
Second major concern is the relationship between education and the economy of our state of New York. Over the course of the last few years, particularly with the difficulties of financing in New York City, our state has faced some very, very difficult decisions on financing of public services. I think that the state has been very prudent. I think tough decisions have been made, but we must assure that our educational system is supporting the economy of the state of New York. There are many ways in which it does support the economy. We might like to talk about those a bit later.
Yeah, I think I'd like to know, first of all, what does that mean, that the educational system supports the economy?
Well, many people think that if you spend an extra dollar on education, in fact, you're taking it away from the economic strength of the state. I think the contrary is true. What education does for the economy is the following. First, through education, we train people for employment. And New York's major asset is a very high-skilled pool of labor. That's our principal economic asset, and the educational system must provide that. A second connection that we have between education and the economy is the contribution that our educational institutions make to business and industry. We have research and development activities in our colleges and universities. Those help businesses and industries to advance their own product lines, to advance their own efficiency. We have the connections in our state in that our library systems provide highly technical information, a resource to our businesses and industries to assure that they're current in their own practice. There are yet other connections.
You know, that's a very pragmatic approach to education, and I don't know, I always thought that education was some way of developing one's beautiful potential without any other kind, in a sense, of objective. It wasn't to make more business or commerce, and I know certainly we need these things, but I really always thought that the end of education was to be educated, so that one did become a more beautiful, creative, exciting, thoughtful, humane being, and thereby made some contribution to that thing that we call society. Where does that come in, that just human development?
Well, it comes in first and foremost. I've been talking about problems in New York, and the problem with respect to education and the economy is a money problem. We must be concerned that there is the resource available in the state to be able to support education. And I'm simply pointing out that education, in turn, helps to build that resource. But education for employment or education for earning is clearly not the sole objective of education. Education is for the purpose of assuring that each person develops that person's capacities. If you go back to the Greek roots of the word, it's to lead out of darkness. That is to take someone from a state of not knowing or understanding and guiding them so that they do understand or they do know a particular subject, conversant with it, and are being able to use that in some way. This is, of course, the development of the person. This is the humanistic characteristic of education, the development of creativity, the development of each person's self-respect, confidence. That's to look at education in a very personal sense. And by no means am I talking about the objective of education in the economy as excluding that very important aspect of education, which is personal development.
Is that really possible in a system which is a mass educational system, such as we have in New York State?
Oh, yes, I think it is. While we have gigantic numbers of students and teachers and institutions in New York State, one must remember we also have the most diverse system of education that exists anywhere. And I mean that by way of our public and non-public schools, our public and independent colleges, our libraries and museums, our services for adults. We have an incredible array of institutions for purposes of education. It's through the different and diverse institutions that you are able to assure that you have many opportunities and options for each individual to learn.
Based on what you're saying, and certainly I think it is overwhelming what education has been and has become in the past 100 years even, and just in New York State, because we're talking about New York State. It is overwhelming, and it is quite amazing and magnificent in a lot of ways. You think, you know, the 1800s, you have one-room schoolhouses and limited resources, one teacher with 9 classes, perhaps, a very different picture. Not even an opaque projector around, right? And yet, the public, parents, and even kids express on a daily basis, teachers too, all kinds of dissatisfactions with the public education system. How do you reckon with that, and what are your feelings on that? Because you certainly do take a major brunt of this as, you know, the head of the department.
The expectations for education in New York State have never been higher, and I'm delighted that that's true. There is a great confidence that the public has, a great confidence that parents have in the power of education. You know, if you look back some 12 years or so, there were a number of critics, social critics, writing about education who were saying that education doesn't make much of a difference. It's all in the family background, it's all in structure. But in fact, the public has belied that. In fact, the public, I think, at this point has a tremendous expectation. Now, when you have that kind of very strong expectation, and when that expectation is not met at all points, then you get to a certain frustration, then you get to a certain criticism, you get a concern that, in fact, perhaps the investment that's made in New York, very substantial investment, is not being realized in the performance for each child. I think it's most important to recognize that in our local school districts, with the kind of commitment that's been taken on budgets, actions over the years, there's been a tremendous expression of support and expectation for education. Now, our job is to make sure that the system is providing a performance which is up to that expectation.
The word performance has been a word in the past couple of years that has had you, legislators, teachers, the Board of Regents, journalists, everyone, tearing their hair out, and that brings us to those wonderful little entities, the basic competency test. And I would like, because I tried very desperately to background myself as we moved along through the past couple of years with the competency testing and trying to measure and upgrade performance. I tried, and I don't think I ever got it straight. So I wondered if, as objectively as you possibly can do it, Commissioner Ambach, if you'd give a brief little history of the competency testing, and then where we are now, and what, in fact, you feel it can mean, and do we have any results yet?
Competency testing in the foundation skills has been used in about 35 different states. In New York, back in 1974, we began discussing using these tests. The first tests in reading and mathematics were given to students in the 9th grade back in 1975. Now, those are the students who will graduate this June of 1979. We have been testing then since 1975. It's not anything that just came around the corner in New York State. We've been doing it for a good 4-year period. Now, in 76, we added a test of writing, and there were also tests in science and in civic responsibility. Just last year, we undertook a very major review of the competency testing program. I had not been the commissioner when the first test went into place. I thought it was important for the regents to review the test. There was much criticism that the tests were too easy. After our review, I recommended to the regents that we change the nature of the test. We make them considerably difficult. We match the difficulty of the test directly to materials that secondary school students were now using in their classrooms. And the regents agreed that we should change the nature of the test. Right now, we have 2 tests that are required for those who will graduate in this June, a test in reading and a test in mathematics. In 1970 and 1980, next year, each person who graduates must pass 3 tests, 1 in writing, 1 in reading, and 1 in mathematics. Those are basic competency tests.
That's like the old days, reading and writing and arithmetic.
Those are the three foundation skills we've been testing. Beginning in June of 1981, those students who will be graduating, they're sophomores now in high school, they'll have to meet the requirements of the new tests, which are considerably more difficult than the old tests. And those will be tests in reading, in writing, and in mathematics.
And that's the picture. Okay. Now, how does that connect or intersect with all of the hullabaloo about the variations in diplomas for graduation based on whether these more stringent competency tests are passed or not? And I wonder if you could update us on that.
We have two different diplomas in the state of New York. One is the regents diploma, and any student who gets a regents diploma has to follow a certain course of study and has to pass the regents examinations in those subjects. Incidentally, we have been testing in the regents exams for more than 100 years in the state of New York. It's a long tradition.
Yeah.
And the second diploma that we have is a local high school diploma. In order for a student to receive the local high school diploma, the student must pass the competency tests and complete the rest of the requirements of courses which the school district offers and which are required under state law.
All right, now, is there yet a third item called a certificate? And is that something that the student who passes neither the regents and gets a regents diploma and does not also get the local high school diploma, do they get a certificate? Is that still active?
The only certificate that is now authorized by the Board of Regents is a certificate which may be awarded to a student who is educable mentally retarded or trainable mentally retarded and who completes that student's individual education program. A student who is not in that category may not receive a certificate. And so if a student completes all other requirements at this point, starting in June 1979, but does not pass the competency tests, that student may not receive a certificate. There's no state certificate, and the Board of Regents has required that local school districts may not give certificates.
Now, why was everybody so upset over that?
Well, there were different recommendations that were made. I, for example, made a recommendation that in certain instances there should be an authorization for local school districts to award a certificate. My recommendation was that where a student completed all other requirements for a diploma, as were currently on the books, but did not complete the competency tests, that they might be awarded a certificate. That's not a diploma. It's clearly different from a diploma. Once a student receives a diploma, you know, they may no longer be entitled to free public education in the state of New York. Once a student receives a certificate, they may still be entitled to free public education. They could continue to work in order to attain a diploma. So there's a very, very big difference. You do not graduate with a certificate. You can only graduate from high school with a diploma. So there was a very, very considerable discussion about the use of certificates, a concern, on the one hand, that if you had certificates, it would undercut the objective of getting to diplomas. On the other hand, a concern, which was my concern, that if you had a certificate, you could continue to keep a motivation with a student to try to go all the way, which is clearly the objective, and get the diploma. But in fact, if they didn't make it on one type of requirement, they still would be provided an indication of the rest of what they'd accomplished. It's a very close judgment call as to whether we should have or should not have had certificates. But the determination has been made, and there are no certificates except the one that I described.
And a lot of people objected because of kids being called dummy, you weren't good enough to get a diploma, right? Whereas if you have a diploma, it somehow makes you like everybody else, right?
Well, the concern, of course, was whether having a certificate was some kind of second-rate paper or recognition. And, of course, the other concern, whether having nothing except a diploma was worse than not having a particular recognition, which would be a certificate, and yet not a diploma.
There's a real basic philosophic problem here in terms of having a kid go through 13 years and then what you award or don't award them and what that means in terms of the substance and qualities of the education itself. But I recognize it's very complex, and I hope we're going to hear from some of our listeners on this and many of the issues that we are able to talk about today with New York State Commissioner of Education, Gordon Ambach. I'm going to give out our phone line. I know I did a lot of talking, but I get greedy sometimes. I do when we get an interesting guest. 382-8100, but Commissioner Ambach is going to be with us for the next hour as well, so I hope many of you will have a chance to speak with him. 382-8100 here on Dialogue 81. I'm Ellie Pankin. We return in a few moments right here on 81 WGY. So I hope many of you will have a chance to speak with him. 382-8100 here on Dialogue 81. I'm Ellie Pankin. We return in a few moments right here on 81 WGY. State Education Commissioner Gordon Ambach, and with you. And, hello, you're on WGY.
Hello. My son is a sophomore who passed the competency test last year. We have been told by two school systems that he has fulfilled the requirements for graduation in 1981. Now, from what I just heard the commissioner say, the requirements are going to change next year and the year after. And there is an implication that he is going to have to pass different tests.
A student who is a sophomore now and has already passed the test will not have to be retested on the new Regents competency test. I thank you very much for the question to clarify that point. The new standards go into place for those students who have not yet passed the old tests, but your son, having completed the requirement on the old test, would not be retested.
Okay, then the question I've been trying to get an answer to is, could he take the new test, and would he jeopardize his position if he took the new test and failed it?
No, he would not jeopardize the fact that he's already completed and passed the old tests. I guess the question would be what the purpose would be on your part of having him take the new tests.
Because although he is not under a label, he does have some learning problems. And there is some question as to whether or not he could pass the written test. It apparently has gone from one extreme to another on the written portion of the exam.
From easy to hard, you mean?
That's correct. It's gone from too easy, apparently, to swung the other direction to rather hard. If I haven't seen it, I don't know, but I understand it's very difficult now.
We're going to have to make a... Can you do this in 15 seconds?
Surely.
Okay.
My suggestion would be that you contact the authorities in your local district. We provide the tests to the local districts. If it made sense for your son to take the new test as well, for purposes of understanding his educational level, perhaps assisting with an instruction program, then I would certainly urge that he take them. But it wouldn't jeopardize his current standing.
That's good. So he's definitely going to graduate, and it might be an interesting
if he completes
challenge.
the balance of his program, of course.
Satisfy his parents, anyway. Thank you very much for your call. And we've run out of time in this segment here on Dialogue 81, but we certainly will be back talking a lot more with New York State Commissioner of Education, Gordon Ambach. I'm Ellie Pankin, and 382-8100, see you in 10. Enjoy. Ambach. And we're talking about just about anything you would like to discuss in the realm of public education for the state. 382-8100, that's 382-8100. And I guess we've got a very popular guest, Commissioner, because the lines at the moment are filled, and I think we'll come right back to calls right now and find out what's on your mind. Hello, you're on WGY with our guest.
Hello, Ellie. I'm a first-time caller.
Good to have you.
I have a question. I have a girl that's going to graduate in June, and she has had a lot of difficulties with math, and she just barely passed the competency test, which was ridiculously easy for the 79 class. She's had this problem, all through her school years, but has never been offered any help from the school district at all. My question is, as long as the state is instituting these competency tests, are they going to force the local school districts on the elementary level to make remedial help available to the children that they recognize that need it?
That's a very important question, and my answer is yes.
Okay.
When the regents considered the development of the competency tests, they were always concerned that the children have the means to be able to get the competencies to pass them. And we have required now that the children who take the 3rd grade and the 6th grade PEP tests, you may have heard of the PEP test, those are statewide. Children who take those tests and who do not achieve at a satisfactory level must be provided with remedial instruction in the grades after they would take those tests so they could be prepared to pass the next level of test. We hope that way to build up their competencies through the grades, and then by the time they get to the 9th grade or 10th grade, when they might be taking the mathematics competency test, they'd be equipped to do so. In reading and writing, we have the preliminary tests at the 9th grade level and then those final tests at the 11th and 12th grade level. The same thing would hold. We would build up to passing the test. But we have a requirement for remedial instruction, and we think that's an extremely important requirement.
I would think so. It should be done on an earlier level, not wait till they get in high school and recognize the fact that they do need this extra help.
Right.
Because if it was not for the fact that we got outside tutoring, she would never, ever have passed even this very, very easy math test.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was just wondering, about the kids coming up, and I'm very happy to hear that this will be done.
Well, we think it's important, and it's a requirement now in state regulations.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks
you.
for calling. Do it again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. 382-8100 here on Dialogue 81. Hello, you're on WGY.
Yes, Ellie.
Go right ahead, you're on the air.
I'm a first-time caller, and I wonder if the commissioner would field a question on finance.
Surely.
My question will be in 2 parts, Commissioner. Number 1, what is your opinion on the chances of a supplemental amount being included in the supplemental budget?
Mm-hmm.
And if you think it might be successful, how will it affect the smaller, poorer districts in upstate New York? And I'll hang up and listen to you answer the question on the air.
And thank you for calling. Do it again.
Okay.
Bye-bye now.
The legislature, at the time they passed the regular local assistance budget, included major recommendations for state aid to the public schools. The chances of additional state assistance coming in the supplemental budget, I'm not capable or qualified to comment on right now. There have been indications by Assembly Speaker Fink that there would be some additional assistance. There is a very particular problem with the tax limit cities, those cities affected by the Hurd decisions, and we have made some recommendations for increased aid for those cities. But I think that we will need to wait just a few more weeks to see how the legislature will review the recommendations that the Speaker has made in order to make a better judgment on whether there will be additional funding in the supplemental budget.
Is it possible, when you have a resource allocation plan based on kinds of need, to make everyone happy? Doesn't every school district, Commissioner Ambach, want more and more and more, and in fact, because of our economy and spiraling costs, need more and more and more?
We have made recommendations this past year that would have increased substantially the state share for education. Our reason for making those recommendations was to try to help to take the burden off of the local property tax, put it on more general state taxes. The second reason for a recommendation is to assist with the problem of helping to equalize assistance to the local school districts. The legislature has passed a significant increase in funds this year, not as significant as we had requested, and we do hope that there will be some additional action in the supplemental budget, but it's a bit early for me to predict whether there will be that action.
I thank you. We're talking with New York State Education Commissioner Gordon Ambach here on Dialogue 81. Our phone's 382-8100. Hello, you're on WGY.
Ellie, I'd like to go back to the competency test because I think there's one sort of situation that's been overlooked in all of it. And that's that a century ago, a child who was not academically talented could be apprenticed to a tradesman, where he could work with his hands if that was where his ability happened to lie, or he stayed home and he helped out on the family farm. Now, we don't have those options. Those children have to go to school, whether they like it or not. And so we have in the past kind of adapted courses, modified the upper levels of the basic courses to give them a minimal education to, as they used to say, get them where they are and take them as far as you can. And if they attended and if they did their work, they were given a credit for the course because they had done what they were capable of doing. And that's what there's no provision for anymore.
Well, actually, there's a tremendous variety of opportunities for students. You're quite right that it's not like it was 100 years ago, in which the schools offered just an academic program, and if one were preparing for a vocation or occupation, they did it by an apprenticeship route or someplace outside of the school. But today, we have a tremendous variety of opportunities for learning a trade, learning a vocation, or preparing for additional academic study. It may be through the BOCES, it may be through a secondary school occupational program. There still is quite a variety. And of course, there are several alternative programs. There are some sponsored under CETA, the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, which some students use, or some children or youth use, not in the regular formal school system. So there's quite a variety. I think that what is important on our foundation skills or basic skills testing program is that we think that in this day, it is important for every student, whether they would be in an apprenticeship program, whether they would be in a college preparatory program, whether they would be in an occupational preparatory program, to be able to have those foundation skills in comprehension, in writing, and in mathematics, because they're going to need it no matter what their occupational choice may be.
But your competency tests don't reflect that. Your competency tests are asking levels of work of 12th graders. 12th graders who presumably, if they are at that level, are academically talented.
Well,
And you're applying that across the board and giving no option.
Well, we are requiring the test, of course, for all students. Whether a person be a 12th grader or age 17, whatever classification you wish, it still is our feeling that these kinds of foundation skills are essential and ought to be mastered. Again, remember, they are, of course, directly related to the receiving of a diploma. Not every student must receive a diploma.
But in this day's job market, yes, every student does if he wants to get a job. Otherwise, there's a tremendous black mark against him when he goes into the job market.
Well, I would come back to our basic reason for having the competency test, and that is to make sure that when a student does complete a secondary program and receives a diploma, then there is a clear indication that that student has met the levels of competence as required in our tests. That's the key to it. So the student has that level of performance, and so that a prospective employer or anyone in the public who might be concerned to know the value of that diploma has a good indicator of what that student can do.
But the student who has tried his best and been faithful in attendance, which are qualities an employer would value, gets nothing to distinguish him from the kid who didn't pass because he never bothered to come to school. He played hooky. He was a constant chronic truant. Or he never did his work when he was there. And there's no way to distinguish.
Well, I suspect that any employer who would be interested in getting a background, getting information on a particular student, would certainly want to do that by way of looking at their characteristics and their performance, whether they've attended and been diligent, as well as what the performance scores would be.
Wouldn't it be possible, or is it possible, is it in fact practice that a kid who falls into the categorization that our caller is talking about and might be a very good practical person to hire, can that child go to teachers or to one of the, guidance persons or somebody who understands and knows his or her record, get letters of recommendation, which are not based on academics, but would be based on some of these other very important qualities when you're being employed, and be able to utilize that as some compensation for just having gotten a certificate and not a diploma.
Yes.
Can't even get a certificate.
They certainly could get letters. They could get indications from guidance counselors or faculty members as to what their work performance has been. And I think that's an excellent suggestion. I think that's exactly what a student in that circumstance ought to have.
How many kids do you feel, or what percentage of the total number of kids who are in our elementary and secondary schools in New York State, Commissioner, fall between the cracks? Are this kind of child, in fact, that our callers described, who has some kind of very definite academic problem? Is there any way of, do you have some figures on that percentage-wise?
It's not possible to give a precise percentage, and it's not a matter of, if you will, of falling through the cracks. I think it's a question of whether there are percentage figures of students who would not be completing the competency test requirements. That's the most common question. What percentage of children are not going to pass the competency test? We will not know finally for the June 1979 class as to the percentage passing until June, because there's one more opportunity for taking the competency test for that class. Indeed, there are opportunities after that. They'll be testing again in August, and if a student cannot complete the requirements by June and wishes to take some summer work and get some special assistance and then take tests again in August, they may do so.
Are you holding your breath or keeping your fingers crossed towards? We should have had you here in July after the test, but...
Well, we know now, Ellie, that for the most part across our state, except for some of the major cities, that the proportion of children who have not yet completed the competency test requirement for June 1979 is very small, 1-2%, something on that order. In New York City, in Buffalo, the percentage is up higher than that, but for the most part in our districts, suburban and rural districts, and our smaller cities, the proportion of children who have not yet completed that requirement is really very small.
Caller, thank you very much for contributing.
One more comment?
One more brief one.
All right, just instead of a percentage, think of it as the thousands of children involved.
You're quite right. I think about it by way of each child.
Right.
And not just in terms of the numbers, but there are those who have concern of what the total effect will be across the state. But you're absolutely right in that our concern must be for each child's level of competence, each child's level of performance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. 382-8100. Hello, you're on WGY with Commissioner Ambach.
Yes. My question is, I'm in the Troy School District, and my kids just took the CAT, the California testing.
Mm-hmm.
And now, is that city level? That's up to the Troy District, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and then they have to pass the state one also.
Yes. What grade level were they in?
Well, I have one in 8th and one's a sophomore.
Yes. Well, each school district may, of course, determine whether it wishes to have some standardized testing given to students in that district for purposes of instruction or perhaps placement in a particular course. That's the option of the local school district. The competency tests are statewide tests.
Mm-hmm. Now, are they the SATs, or is that what?
No, that's still a different kind of a test.
Our school district is getting away from the SATs. They're trying the California testing. Now, my daughter, who's in 8th grade, found it very difficult. Now, is that at different levels? Are there different, like...
The California test?
Yeah.
I can't give you an exact comparison with our competency test and the California test. I'm not quite sure which test she took. There are quite a battery of them called the California test. The tests of competence that we have preliminary tests that your daughter will probably be taking next year in reading and in writing. And she will be taking a competency test in mathematics when she completes the last course that she's taking in math at the high school level. And then she'll be taking her final competency tests in reading and writing in either the 11th or the 12th grade.
Now, one more question. When they came out with the state lottery, they said a large percentage was going into the school educational system. Do you know what percentage?
Well, the funds that are collected for the state lottery, and those that go into the state treasury after, of course, the payments are made and the awards for the winners of the lottery. The funds that go into the state treasury are, in fact, put into the education budget. The expenditures that the state makes for education are really controlled by the formula that the state sets, and then the lottery funds are used to help to pay for that formula. The bulk of the money that the state has for education does not come from the lottery. Most of it comes from the other tax sources. So the lottery money really gets folded into the overall state treasury, and then it's used in turn to help pay for that state aid formula. And that's very important in the sense that the amount of money for education does not go up or down each year depending upon what the lottery receipts are. The amount of money for education is really guaranteed, and then the lottery funds are put in to help to cover that cost.
You ought to try to get a cut of casino gambling. That's what I think. Caller, thank you very much for calling. I think to set you straight on the SATs, I think those are to evaluate, aren't they, Commissioner, performance in college? Those are college oriented, aren't they?
The SATs are used for admission to college. Students who are in their 11th or 12th grade seeking to go to college would take those tests, and the college admissions officers use those tests to determine whether the student has the capability of meeting the requirements of that particular college.
I thank you. One brief question. You said that the PEP tests and the CATs, et cetera, all the different academic tests were used to either determine levels of instruction or student competence. And I wondered how many tests and what kinds of tests are used to determine teacher performance and competence.
At the present time in New York State, there is not a single test which is used for determining teacher competence or determining whether a teacher should have a certificate. Now, there are some states that have a requirement that those who would teach within the state must pass a test. The test most commonly used is called the National Teacher Examination. There are some tests in other states. And in New York State, teachers who wish to teach in New York City must pass a test there, and teachers who wish to teach in Buffalo must pass a separate test there. We are considering right now, on a statewide basis, the issue of whether we should have a single test for teaching, or whether, in fact, we should continue to rely on the criteria of having each of the college preparatory programs, the teacher training programs, determine whether the teacher is ready to teach, is competent to teach.
Have you gotten any feedback from the unions yet as to how they feel about that?
Well, you have, of course, in New York City, you've had very strong support from the United Federation of Teachers for the tests which are in place in New York City, and representatives of the NYSUT, of the New York State United Teachers, who were on a task force that we had in the department in the past couple of years, supported the use of a statewide examination for entry into teaching. So there's a considerable support for a test of competence and entry into teaching.
We're talking with New York State Education Commissioner Gordon Ambach here on Dialogue 81. I'm Ellie Pankin. Our phone line, 382-8100. And we've got a very exciting week, I think, for you, and we've begun it today. We'll return in a moment to more calls for Commissioner Ambach right after this here on 81 WGY. For New York State Education Commissioner Gordon Ambach. Hello, you're on WGY.
Hello. I have a son that's a junior in college, and he had won a Regents scholarship. He hasn't received any of his payment for this past year. I was wondering if he could tell me how I could check into that.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the full question.
Her son is a junior in college. He has a Regents scholarship, and this year, am I right, caller, he has not received any of his payments so far?
Right.
And she wonders what the problem is.
I'm going to have to refer you to the Higher Education Services Corporation on that. The administration of funding for loans or scholarship aid in New York State is not handled by the Education Department, but it is handled by the Higher Education Services Corporation.
Okay, can I call them, or do you have an address?
Well, you can look it up, I believe, in your phone book, and if you have a problem, I could help you with that.
All right, thank you very much.
Quite welcome.
Bye.
Bye-bye now. I want to ask a question, little scuttlebutt that I heard. Do I understand that they're either going to modify the New York State Higher Education Assistance Corporation or disappear it? That's what I heard. I hate to be a rumor monger on 50,000 watts, but I had heard that there might be some major changes there.
I can't verify the rumor or alter it. The Higher Education Services Corporation was formed back in 1974 by combining the old loan program and the loan corporation with the administration of the scholarships, which we had handled formally in the department. The idea was to put all of that as student assistance into one organization, both loans and scholarships. I am not certain whether there will be an attempt to try to alter that structure. There has been some discussion on the Senate side. There was a recommendation to incorporate the programs into the Department of Taxation and Finance, because so much of it is involved with the overall tax and finance issues. But I'm not certain as to how far that recommendation will go.
Okay.
My own view is that that whole function ought to be within the Education Department, so that there could be a consistency of our handling the scholarship awards, the financing arrangements, and connections with the federal agencies. If we did that, then we'd have a much better streamlined arrangement, so students in New York State would have a one-stop shop for purposes of getting assistance.
And you'd have a larger department.
That's not my reason for making the recommendation. I assure you that we have considerable responsibility now. My reason for making the recommendation is the interest of the student and making sure that they don't have to deal with several different agencies for purposes of getting their assistance in a timely way. It's sparked by the kind of question that the woman just asked. Where's my payment on a particular program?
Truth is, you do have an enormous responsibility and area of activity, the New York State Education Department. Does that ever overwhelm you, or do you ever sit down in a rock and say, God, we are really responsible for a horrendous number of things for a lot of people?
It's a very, very large responsibility, but New York has a unique system in that all of our educational institutions are linked together under the regents in the State Education Department. The colleges and universities, the schools, the libraries, the museums, vocational rehabilitation, public television. I think that's a very good thing. It's especially important for the future because our population is getting older. We have more concerns about adults and adult learning, and we have a capacity of being able to put together the concerns for colleges and universities, libraries and museums, public television, adult learning activities that will be so much more important in the future. You can't do that in other states. We're the only state that has this kind of comprehensive structure. And I'm delighted that we have it, and I'm very pleased that I have responsibility.